The filing timestamp on Lena Cho's submission read 06:14 station time. Vetharalu noticed it before he noticed anything else, because 06:14 was 2 hours before the compact arbitration panel opened its intake queue, which meant she had filed through the emergency disclosure portal, the one that bypassed his office entirely and routed directly to the panel's sealed record. He read the timestamp again. Then he read the document title. Then he sat very still in his chair for a long time, the gill flanges along his jaw cycling in slow, involuntary pulses, the way they did when he was working through something he did not yet want to fully believe. The document title was Full Audit Disclosure Remediation Sector 7, Kethvarun Industrial Zone, All 7 Findings, Unredacted. Vetharalu had personally handed Lena Cho that assignment 11 days ago. He had handed it to her because she was young, because she was on exchange placement, because she had no institutional relationships to protect and no senior advocate to run to if someone told her quietly that certain findings were better summarized than detailed. He had handed it to her because he had needed someone who did not yet know how things worked on the station, someone who would, in his estimation, do what she was told. He had told her, with the careful indirection that long practice had taught him, that the Remediation Sector 7 report was a sensitive matter, that the industrial partners involved had deep ties to the Compact Infrastructure Council, that a junior auditor's career benefited from a reputation for discretion, and that 7 findings could almost certainly be condensed to 2 without any loss of material substance. He had not, technically, told her to bury anything. He had simply made very clear what the professionally wise course of action looked like. Lena Cho had listened to all of it, nodded once and said, "Thank you for the context." Then she had filed all 7 findings, unredacted, through the emergency disclosure portal at 06:14 in the morning, 2 hours before he could have intercepted them. Vetharalu pulled up her full submission on his terminal. The first finding detailed coolant discharge from Processing Unit 4 at concentrations that exceeded the compact environmental threshold by a factor of 9. The second documented falsified maintenance logs, 3 consecutive quarterly inspections recorded as completed on dates when the inspection team's own travel records showed them off station. The third was a material substitution. Fire suppressant compound in the Zone 7 emergency corridors had been quietly replaced with a cheaper variant that was not rated for the chemical class of fires the zone actually produced. Vetharalu already knew about the first 3. He had helped draft the summary language that would have reduced them to a single line, noting that minor operational variances had been identified and were under internal review. He had reviewed that language 4 times. He thought it was rather good. The fourth finding was the one that made the gill flanges stop cycling entirely. Lena Cho had cross-referenced the falsified maintenance logs against the station's structural integrity database. She had found 17 load-bearing anchor points in Corridor Block 9 that had been recorded as serviced but had not been touched in 4 years. She had then pulled the weight load projections for the current tenant occupancy in Block 9 and run the numbers against the unserviced anchor specifications. The numbers did not agree. The numbers disagreed by a margin that she had expressed, in the dry, flat language of a compliance auditor, as a potential structural failure event under nominal operating conditions, probability exceeding 0.6 over a 180-day horizon. Block 9 currently housed the Kethvarun Secondary School Annex. Occupancy, approximately 400 students, ages 6 through 14. He kept reading. The fifth finding documented that 2 of the industrial partners involved in the cover-up, names Vetharalu recognized, names that appeared regularly in his own professional correspondence, had known about the anchor degradation for at least 14 months. There were internal communications. Lena Cho had obtained them through a provision in the compact audit protocols that allowed an active auditor to compel document production during an open investigation, a provision so rarely used that Vethiralu had genuinely forgotten it existed. She had used it on day 4 of her 11-day assignment. The sixth finding was Vethiralu's own office. Not by name. The finding described, in precise bureaucratic language, the pattern of how findings 1 through 5 had been managed at the supervisory level. The timing of the assignment to an exchange auditor, the nature of the guidance given at briefing, the specific language used in that guidance, the channel through which the assignment had been conveyed, and the dates on which interim drafts had been submitted to, and returned from, the supervising office with markings that had consistently directed the auditor toward condensed summary language rather than full disclosure. She had kept every marked-up draft. She had submitted them as appendices. Reading it, Vethiralu found himself working backward through the timeline of the 11 days. He had returned her first interim draft on day 3 with a single annotation at the top. Recommend consolidation of technical findings for readability. He had meant it as a direction. He had written it as a suggestion. He now understood, reading it in the context of finding 6, that a junior auditor with any institutional instinct would have read it as a direction regardless of how it was phrased, and that Lena Cho had apparently read it, processed it, set it aside, and used day 4 to invoke the document compulsion provision and pull the internal communications that became finding 5. She had not argued with him. She had not escalated to a senior advocate. She had simply gone back to the primary sources and found more of what he had been hoping she would not look for. He returned her second draft on day 7. She filed the full unredacted disclosure on day 11. The gap between those two dates accounted for findings 6 and 7, the supervisory pattern and the 6-year history. She had spent 4 days assembling the architecture of what had been done to this file, and she had done it using the same methodical standard she had applied to everything else. No assertion without a primary source, no conclusion without a supporting document. Her faculty had flagged this tendency. Nobody had apparently considered what it would look like pointed directly at a cover-up. Vethiralu looked at the appendices for a long time. The 7th finding was a single paragraph. It noted that the 5 prior Remediation Sector 7 audits conducted over the preceding 6 years had all been assigned to exchange or junior placement auditors. It noted that all 5 had concluded with summary language findings citing minor operational variances under internal review. It noted that the supervising office for all 5 audits had been the same office. It noted that all 5 auditors had subsequently received transfer requests approved within 30 days of filing, which had the effect of removing them from the station before any follow-up audit could be assigned to them. Lena Cho's 7th finding was a 6-year pattern, and she had documented it in 11 days, using nothing but the records that the station's own compliance bureau was required by law to retain. Vethiralu's comm unit showed 7 missed messages. 3 were from the industrial partners. 2 were from the Infrastructure Council Liaison Office. 1 was from the senior compliance director above him, marked urgent. 1 was from the compact arbitration panel, confirming receipt of an emergency disclosure filing and advising that a hearing had been convened for 09:00 the same morning. He checked the station clock. It was 07:43. He pulled up Lena Cho's placement record. Exchange auditor, 3rd rotation, seconded from the Terran Compact Liaison Office. 23 years old. No prior disciplinary flags. Academic record, unremarkable by Compact Auditing Board standards, which was to say it was perfectly adequate and showed no particular genius. Her faculty review noted that she had a tendency toward excessive documentation and reluctance to accept summary conclusions without primary source verification. Her faculty had meant it as a mild criticism. Vetharalu read it now as a technical specification. He had hired the one person on the station who would please summarize these findings, as a reason to go and find more of them. He sat back in his chair. The thing was, and he understood this clearly now, in the particular way that clarity arrives when there is nowhere left to hide from it. The thing was that the fourth finding was about children. 400 children in a corridor block with load-bearing anchors that were going to fail, and the failure probability had been sitting in the structural database for months, and he had known a version of it, a softer version, a version filtered through the comfortable language of under internal review, and he had passed that version along to the summary column and not looked at it again. He had not known about the school annex. He wanted to believe that mattered. He was no longer sure that it did. The comm unit showed another message arriving. The Infrastructure Council liaison again. Vetharalu did not open it. Instead, he opened the compact arbitration panel's public docket. Lena Cho's filing was already listed, emergency disclosure, case reference KV 72219 ED, status, active. The sealed record notation indicated that the panel had already dispatched a structural inspection team to Corridor Block 9. The notation also indicated that the secondary school annex had been quietly advised of an unscheduled safety inspection, and that morning classes had been relocated to the upper wing pending clearance. The children were safe. They were safe because a 23-year-old auditor on exchange placement had filed a report at 06:14 in the morning rather than accept the career-conscious advice she had been given. They were safe because she had used a document compulsion provision that the people relying on her compliance had apparently forgotten existed. They were safe because her faculty supervisor had noted her reluctance to accept summary conclusions in a tone of mild professional disappointment, and she had treated that reluctance as an operating principle rather than a flaw to correct. Vetharalu had overseen the Remediation Sector 7 file for 6 years. 6 years of summary language. 6 years of exchange auditors who had, apparently, known better than to push back, or had been too uncertain to try, or had simply not been Lena Cho. He had handed her the assignment because she was junior and had no institutional relationships to protect. He understood now, with the kind of precision that only comes too late, that he had made a significant error in his assessment of what institutional relationships were actually for. At 08:55, Vetharalu walked into the compact arbitration panel's hearing room. He had not called the Infrastructure Council liaison back. He had not responded to the industrial partners. He had instead spent 45 minutes reviewing Lena Cho's submission from the beginning, because he was a compliance director, and the document in front of him was one of the most technically precise audit findings he had encountered in 22 years, and he had needed to understand it fully before he decided what to do with that understanding. The hearing room was a long, low-ceilinged chamber with the compact seal pressed into the stone above the arbitration bench. Lena Cho was already there. She was seated at the disclosure desk to the left of the chamber, a data pad in front of her, wearing the plain gray audit tunic of an exchange placement. She did not look nervous. She looked like someone who had done her job and was waiting for the meeting to begin. She noticed him come in. She nodded once. He nodded back. He found a seat on the near side of the chamber, in the section reserved for responding parties. The panel chair opened the session at exactly 09:00. She reviewed the disclosure filing number, confirmed the emergency provisions invoked, and noted for the record that structural inspection teams had been dispatched to Corridor Block 9 at 07:15 and had confirmed load-bearing anchor degradation in 11 of the 17 flagged points. 11 of 17 confirmed in under 2 hours. The panel chair looked at the disclosure desk and asked whether the filing auditor wished to speak to the record. Lena Cho said, in a voice that carried the flat, unhurried precision of someone reading a meter reading aloud. "The filing is complete. All supporting documentation is in the appendices. I have nothing to add." The panel chair then looked at the responding party section of the chamber. Vethiralu had been a compliance director for 22 years. He had sat in rooms like this many times. He had always known in those rooms exactly what the right answer was for his office, for the partners, for the careful balance of institutional interests that kept a station running smoothly and everyone in their correct positions. He had come into this room this morning, knowing that the right answer for all of those things was to invoke procedural challenge, question the emergency disclosure provisions, and buy time for the institutional machinery to absorb the shock and redirect it. He also knew what 11 confirmed anchor failures meant for the children who had been sitting under them. He said, "The Compliance Directorate does not contest the findings. We request that the panel treat all 7 items as active remediation orders effective immediately." The room was quiet for a moment. Lena Cho did not look up from her data pad. She wrote something down. He thought from the angle that it might have been a checkmark. The panel chair confirmed the remediation orders and opened the secondary inquiry, the one pertaining to the 6th finding, the one about the supervising office, the one with the marked-up drafts in the appendices. Vethiralu said, "I will cooperate fully." He meant it. He was reasonably certain it would cost him his position, and possibly more than that, and he sat with that knowledge in a way that was quieter than he expected. Because the anchor failures had been confirmed, and the children had been moved to the upper wing before morning classes, and the only reason any of that was true was that someone had done the job he had specifically tried to prevent her from doing. There was not, he found, very much to say against that. Across the chamber, Lena Cho was still writing. She wrote with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who had more documentation to produce, and intended to produce all of it, to the last line, for the record.